Hi, welcome back to the Talking Tavern. I'm Ben, and I am rejoined by Devin Night for part 2 of my interview with one of the most prolific token makers on Roll20 and Fantasy Grounds. Welcome back, Devin.
Thank you.
Obviously, you've mentioned you play your own games over Roll20 as well. Have you played any in-person games recently, or has that been in the past more?
It's not as easy. It's not as easy to have in-person games, but I do play a lot of board games. You know, I sit across the table, and social interaction's still great that way. But I don't get to the table for role playing as much as I used to.
Okay, I was wondering if you or perhaps people that get commissioned tokens, if any of them have tried to have them in an actual game as like top-down printed, as bound to a card as tokens in the game. Is that something that people do?
I've done a couple things that were meant to be printed and stuff, but it's definitely not as popular, and I really have actually never heard anybody tell me that they do their face-to-face games using my tokens, though. Sometimes I've thought about getting them printed up, but when you add printing, then you have to deal with printers, you have to deal with the physical product and shipping, and then a lot of overhead comes into play as soon as you go physical.
I think Wizards did dip into overhead tokens back in 4E. They had some sort of monster release for that. But yeah, I often think it's odd though that we play on these on flat 2D overhead maps, and the automatic go-to is to put three-dimensional miniatures on it. Whereas really, if it's all 2D, it should all just fit in. But people do like a three-dimensional product, a tangible product, I guess, when they're playing in person.
Yeah.
So let's talk a little bit about the Tome of Beasts contract. It sounded like from your blog that this was a huge contract. It's got 400 monsters in it. Can you describe how this came to be and perhaps how this differed from your usual way of working with commissions?
Yeah. First of all, Wolfgang Bauer and Cabal Press have been awesome. This is great. When they were running their Kickstarter for Tome of Beasts, they actually contacted me and was like, hey, what would it cost us to have you do all of these? And I gave them the usual price, which I think is very reasonable. And I think they're okay with that. Unfortunately, what I told them is it would take at least probably a year to do 400 tokens, at least, if I was cranking them out. And I don't think at that time they were ready to wait that long to deliver something to somebody. So it kind of just dissipated at that point. But then over the course of just this past year, I've had a lot of people contact me and be like, hey, I need this monster. It looks really awesome. It's a great monster. And I started making them, and I had about 8 or 9 or 10 of them done. And I'm like, if I keep getting requests for these, I'm like, I'd love to get them out there. But I'm like, I've worked with Wolfgang in the past, so I'm like, I didn't want to step on his toes. So I contacted them back, and I'm like, hey, how about if I pay you guys a licensing fee, and then you guys let me, work on these on my own, my own schedule, and I'll release them, when I can. And Wolfgang was super excited by that, and he's like, go for it. And so, normally people are contacting me, but in this case, I wanted to. I saw the monsters in that book, and I backed the Kickstarter. I was excited for those, and I'm like, I'd love to work on these. These are exciting monsters, and there are a whole bunch of them. So, yeah, and they were happy to let me do it. So that's what I'm working on for the next year.
Brilliant. So at the time of this interview, the first pack's just been released. Have you got a schedule on when you expect the following packs to be released? Because there could be people who are waiting for monsters who are like towards the end of the alphabet, I suppose, right, yeah. Towards the end of the book.
And that's I wanted to be very precise about how I was doing them instead of doing some randomly here and there. I wanted people, even though it's detrimental to know that they have to wait, I wanted people to know that eventually I will get to that spot. Yeah. The schedule, and this, of course, it changes depending on how much work comes in and how the girls are having a month. If soccer, takes up a lot of time, then it takes away time for me, or if they're sick and stay home. But the long story short, I'm going to try to get a new one out about every 2 months.
Okay.
Which, if I can do faster, I will. But that makes, for me, it makes about 3 or 4 tokens per weekday that I have to create so that I have these done every so often.
Well, what's your schedule of like hours working and so on? Does it vary quite a bit, or do you have like a set schedule of X number of days a week, X number of hours?
Right. When the summertime is horrible. The girls are here, they're making lots of noise, and I get drawn all over the place. But as soon as the girls go to school, they leave in the morning about 8 o'clock, and I work from 8 o'clock until about 4 o'clock in the afternoon every day during the week. The goal is, if I'm doing characters, is to do at least 2 characters per day. If I'm doing monsters, I usually try to do between 4 or 5 monsters a day, when possible. Sometimes monsters are a little bit easier, and sometimes they're just as hard as characters, but I've set myself up for at the minimum of 3 tokens per day to get these done on a timely fashion.
I actually spoke with another token artist recently. I'll leave him unnamed. But when your name came up, his words were along the lines of, Devin is a machine that eats time and creates more Roll20 stuff. I've huge respect for the guy. He must work non-stop. So I think you've probably got a reputation as being a very hard-working token machine. In that sense.
I do, but I mean, I'm not as young as I used to be. So I take nights off usually and weekends, unless I'm way behind. There's other things to do.
I'm assuming you obviously love your work, but is there ever a point where you kind of set yourself a target and it becomes a grind, it becomes like work, or is it always just sunshine and good fun?
I doubt anybody ever has that, regardless of how good your job is. There are times when I get burned out on tokens, and I want to switch to doing maps. I want to make maps, or I want to make like actual 2D drawings of characters and stuff, or just do design work. But when you hit those spots, if you have deadlines, you just have to work through it. You know, that's the difference between somebody who's really dedicated and loves it versus someone who's just kind of fooling around. It's like when you hit that wall and you don't want to do it, you just have to make yourself do it. The only time I don't is when I'm sick, or I had a day last week where I just couldn't draw to save my life. Like, I don't know what it was about that day, but like every line I drew was horrible. Every color I chose was bad. And that day I'm just like, nothing's working. I'm just going to take the day off. But then the next day, right back to it. So it happens to everybody, I think.
Yeah, it must just be like another form of writer's block, I guess, just with art.
Yep.
But what RPGs do you think have the best monsters and races, classes for token creation? What do you enjoy creating the most?
Wow, that's a good question. I mean, fantasy obviously is the biggest genre, and it has the best stuff. But the one thing that I really regret having the Tome of Beasts going on right now is that Starfinder came out, and all of a sudden sci-fi stuff is really getting some attention. In the past, my sci-fi token packs sell so boring. I mean, so bad. It's not worth working on sci-fi stuff as much. But with Starfinder, like, a lot more people are excited. I'd love to be making aliens and sci-fi creatures and sci-fi characters, but I haven't got a lot of requests for them yet, and I don't have a lot of time for just jumping in and making stuff myself to get it out there.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, it's got to pay the bills in the end, isn't it? You can't just do what what you've not done before. I guess people are more invested, I guess, in fantasy at the minute. It could change, I suppose. Right.
And yeah, I don't mind. I mean, I try to release at least 1 or 2 free packs every year. Especially around Christmas time, I will put out a free pack of something. And those are usually things that I want to do that I know probably aren't going to be popular and like sell a lot, but at the same time, there are things that just need to have tokens made of them, because why not, you know? So not as popular, but still. I love doing all kinds of stuff and challenging things I've never done before.
Yeah, that's a good point. You do have a lot of free tokens on there, so even if people aren't really paying attention to which packs these free tokens are coming from, the odds are that most Roll20 players have at some point used your tokens.
Yeah.
Does that give like a sense of pride, I guess, to know that there's people having fun and using your work in the games, and Roll20's so big now. There's so many active games on there, a big audience, I suppose.
It is. It's great knowing that I'm contributing to people enjoying their games, and I get enough feedback that I'm, like, I kind of, if getting positive feedback was currency, that would be enough to pay my bills to make me want to keep working. It's really like some days it's about the money, but a lot of the days it's just about feeling like I've given something to somebody and it made their game that much better. And that's kind of where I get the energy to keep going, is knowing that, if I create this and it's awesome and that person puts it on the table and they're excited by it, that'll make their role playing better. That'll make the whole game just feel more immersive. I'm like, makes me feel really good to know that I, in some ways, contribute to that. Yeah.
You recently did a blog post where you mentioned about how much work you contributed towards all these tokens. And in particular, if we look at Roll20, you've mentioned about 4,500 tokens over 96 packs. I'm sure it's a few weeks probably since you posted that, so it's probably gone up for even more. But with all these combinations of weapons, races, classes, characters, monsters, it probably provides nearly limitless work. But do you think there'll ever be a day where you've done every combination, you kind of run out of options? It's like, oh no, I've done that before. Okay. Do you see that ever happening, or is it genuinely limitless?
Yeah, I don't think. I think it's more likely that people will find something better than overhead tokens before I run out of making overhead tokens. There's just, whenever I think it gets boring, somebody sends in a request for something that's just crazy, and all of a sudden it's like it's on again, And there's so many things, despite the fact I've covered most of the SRD, there's like the kobolds. They need their own pack. They need a whole pack of them. Gnolls, I haven't done an entire Gnolls pack. One of the things that I'm trying to get into now more of is creating non-combatants. So, like when you go into that orc camp, where's the orc mother with the baby? Where's the orc children? I have one patron who's been really great about ordering non-combat characters. Ones that are just kind of discussing things, and ones that are, sitting around prepared for an adventure but aren't actually fighting at that moment.
Yeah.
So it's limitless.
Yeah, I must say actually you've touched upon something there, because one of the certainly tokens I tend to use the most of yours actually probably are the NPC townsfolk type tokens, just because the characters aren't necessarily fighting orcs at every point, but they're always going to different towns, and there's always like different geographical things where you'd want the townspeople to maybe have a different style or different jobs and so on like that, as you say. How do you find Fantasy Grounds and Roll20 as marketplaces? How easy is that for you?
The funny thing, and I hope I don't tell for a second, when Roll20 was first starting out, they approached me and they're like, hey, can we have all your stuff for our site? And at that time it was mostly the free stuff. And at that point, I'm like, oh my God, here's another virtual tabletop company that's just going to go under in a year or less.
Yeah.
But they surprised me. Their market boomed. I mean, it's so big. Fantasy Grounds has been here longer, and I started with Fantasy Grounds and loved the program. Their market's a little bit smaller, but they have made some huge strides in advancing their app and making it. It's really awesome. So both of those markets have been tremendously good for my business.